Hello everybody, and thanks for joining us on this very special video with what you could probably guess this is. I'll give you a second to breathe it in, and then we'll come right back and we'll talk about it more. Quite a while ago, I had a close friend of mine win a system that they called the Optimus giveaway system. And it was a really incredible system until my friend received the system and was a little disheartened by the fact that it kind of seemed like they cut some corners. So I offered, after he asked me some questions that seemed kind of off about a system that was hardline tubed, I asked him to bring it to me, which meant bring it to my office here at AVA Direct, so we could all take a closer look at it. And we were just absolutely floored at the amount of corners that were cut for a system of this caliber, at least. We expect, maybe it's our own expectations combined with my own personal expectations, but generally when we build high-end custom liquid-cooled systems like this, and really any system for that matter, we generally don't like to cut corners by default unless it is specifically asked of us to cut corners for one reason or another, who knows. So I pitched the idea that maybe we make that system better. He loved the idea. We got the support of EK water blocks. We got the support of Intel. We got the support of, well, us internally for us to really make this system better. So then we kind of got the wheels turning as far as what we could do with that system, since sky was technically the limit. I picked my friend's brain as far as what he wanted, and I know he's always been a huge fan of Star Wars. And that's when things really started kind of, the cogwheels started turning even further. I mean, we went as far as we threw the system into a CAD model and we messed with different color designs and we kind of determined what blended well and what didn't. And this is what we ended up with. And this was the culmination of, I would say, probably like a dozen different tweaks along the way. It took us quite a while to get the system put together, but it was worth it in the long run. Every single time we thought that we had the design of the system down, we kept finding other things to do better, and we just kept raising the bar. And I think this is easily one of the best custom modded systems we've done to date, not just in design and aesthetics, but just all of the thought and blood and sweat and tears that went into this. I put every amount of my time that I could in building this system. I can't take credit for the paint job. That was Zach. You've seen him do a lot of our modded systems in the past. He did all the paint work on it. He came up with all the designs to do like the wear and tear on it to really make it look like Boba's armor and how it was weathered and had seen a day of battle or two. And I can't give credit for the overall color design. That was Gerard and I working together to kind of figure out what was going to work and blend out very well. The only original specifications that remain in the system are the power supply, the memory, and the Intel M.2 that's installed in the board. Everything else, I was able to get support either internally or I was able to get support from partners like EKWB. Intel was kind enough to give us the CPU, and this is why we decided to kind of hold off on launching this system until we were able to go to launch with something pretty significant. Because originally the system had a 9900 KS, which was great back in its day, and it also had an RTX 2080, which we later found out the RTX 2080 was physically modified to fit the block that was installed in it, so the warranty was void on it. I can proudly say that the graphics card that's in it now is an RTX 3080, not physically modified, so it's got a warranty through EVGA. The block is fully supported by EKWB, so nothing crazy there. And you'll also see that the water block looks kind of strange. It's EKWB's new LGA 1700 water blocks. If you've ever done liquid cooling with EKWB, or if you've followed any of their liquid cooling products, that's typically the kind of design you'd see on a monoblocks, where it's just kind of square and chunky. Worked out really well in this case because it provides full coverage of the CPU, but even coverage. It's very easy to install these blocks and provide even coverage for cooling. So everything else that you see in the system other than those items was upgraded or provided by either us or EKWB to make this system, and Intel, to make this system as best as it could possibly be. Painting this case, not simple at all. So everything's riveted, everything. So we had to drill out a significant amount of rivets. There were a few things as far as like maybe the back panel that there were screws, and the front panel there were screws, which we later replaced with rivets just to kind of add to the overall aesthetic. You'll see like the white rivets that we added for just kind of some neat little accents. We had to take all that apart. The case is powder coated by default. Removing powder coating is not easy, so that required a lot of paint stripper, a pressure washer, and then finishing that up with physical sanding to get that off down to bare aluminum. And in fact, we liked the bare aluminum look because of, you know, the design of a Mandalorian's armor. So we kept the bare aluminum look in some areas because it added to the aesthetic. But you can see there's no powder coating on it anymore. It's all custom painted. We actually have a shop that's a few towns over from us where they can color match and color code anything. And I actually found color codes for Boba's suit and helmet and Under Armour and provided it to this shop, and they match all of these up with automotive paint colors. So all the paint that you see on the case, it's all automotive paint, clear coat and finish, everything. So I mean, it's the real deal. We didn't really spare an expense at all with this system because as a company we don't like to really spare expenses with our products. So I think really it's great when we get to do these projects because the limitation really is just us and supportive partners and what they're willing to provide, and sky's the limit. You know, usually when we build customer systems, the majority of them will have a budget, so we have a budget we have to stick to, so we tell them the things we can do within their budget and the things we can't do, and we let them make that decision. But for projects like this, you get to really see what we're made of and what we're capable of. So, tube design. Let's talk about that a little bit. The tube design I went with specifically because originally I was bending the tubes and I was doing the 90-degree bends and the 45-degree bends without fittings, and I just kind of felt like it took away from the overall aesthetic and design of Boba Fett. I really wanted to give it an industrial look because that's a very that's a Star Wars aesthetic. It's always been kind of grungy and industrial and out there. So I messed with the idea of just doing clean straight tubes and using adapters, and I thought it looked great, so I ran with it. EK sent me, you know, a significant amount of adapters. I really got to hand it to EK Water Blocks because there were at least half a dozen different times where I thought I'd be done with the overall design and I'd recognize that I needed more things. And so I reached out to EK like, hey, can you send me more things? And they really didn't give me a problem ever. They were very supportive and gave me what I needed to get it done. You know, even with the challenges of COVID, there were some things that I had to wait for because shipments were kind of slow to a crawl, but that's all right. I have to give a significant amount of credit to my friend too. He was incredibly patient, no matter how long it took for us to work on it. You know, luckily he's got a job and things that keep him busy. So even till this day, he tells me, you know, I can't wait to get my hands on it, but I don't know when I'm going to find the time to play on it. I really hope he finds the time now, and I hope the design is the motivation for him to want to spend time on it and build with it and maybe even cuddle it a day or two. Big shout out to Dave over at Mainframe Customs for these cables because he handmade these cables. I didn't tell him anything as far as how I wanted them to design. I just said, hey Dave, would you mind pitching in some cables for this build? And he was like, sure. What kind of build is it? And I took a photo and I'm like, this is the kind of build it is. I didn't even have to tell him what it was, and he was like, dude, I already got a design down. I'll get them to you within a week. And you know, he finished them within a week, shipped it, took about another week to get to us, and I was blown away at the design of the cables he did because I didn't have to tell him anything. He designed it all himself, and that's what really makes these kinds of builds special. It's not me and the time that I put into building it from the ground up. It's not Zach and the time that he put into painting it and the special touches, or Gerard in the way that he helped with the design and the color scheme. It's everybody collectively putting their own personality touch in it and making it what it is, because it's impossible for one person, such as myself, to just come up with all of this and have so much personality and character into it. Speaking of which, if any of you have been watching this video and you're wondering how in the ever-loving hell we were able to split two different colors of coolant on a distribution block that should only have one, well, I'm not going to tell you right away. But we'll talk about where those tubes go. So if you look closely at the spot inside of the Lian Li case, where you could normally put 3 fans in the center that could pull air from the back, that has been completely redone with a custom-made panel that acts as a pass-through for these tubes. Where do those tubes go, Joe? Where do they go? Maybe if you ask nicely, I might tell you. If you're just going to give me attitude, you can forget about it. I ain't going to tell you nothing. You're just going to sit here and you're going to stay wondering. You're not going to be able to sleep at night. No, really, I'm going to tell you. So as you can see too, on the back panel, just kind of left it gray and boring because, well, the under armor of Boba Fett's armor is kind of gray and boring, right? So, the worst part, the most offending part of that Optimus build was indeed the back panel. And the reason being was they did hardline tubing up front, and then when you got to the back of the PC, it was soft line tubes. And I mean, that's one way to get it done, but I don't know. I thought I was alone in feeling like that was kind of a cop-out and that was just the easy route to take. But I wasn't alone in that thought process. Everybody that saw this system, they were like, why even do hardline tubing if you can't just see it all the way through? Like, that's the point. Like, either do all soft line or do hardline. So, we did not want to compromise. I mean, one of our terms, one of our slogans as a custom PC builder for AVA Direct is customize without compromise. We don't like compromising. We will not compromise unless absolutely necessary by request. You know, and by that I mean, if somebody wants to put a butt ton of money into their hardware, but they also want RGB lighting, but they don't have the budget, so they decide, okay, instead of getting 64 gigs of memory, I'll get 32 so I can get flashy RGB lights. That is a compromise driven by you, the end user, not by us. I would never tell anybody to not get 64 gigs of memory so they could get flashy RGB lights. That's dumb. Okay, it's not dumb. It's pretty offensive to say it's dumb, but it doesn't make sense if you care about how your PC performs. Speaking of caring about how your PC performs, I cared about how the tubes looked all throughout. So we did a pass-through panel, and I hard tubed all of those tubes from back to front. And you'll notice, this is where the second reservoir, this is where the red color comes from, because in front and back and side, you see everywhere. That was an idea that I had probably from the get-go, when we had everything in CAD and we were designing the color, because I didn't want to go with just one. I didn't want to go with one loop because the Optimus build already had two. And I kind of felt like if we would have went from 2 to 1, then just like they did with the tubing, we would also be cutting corners for the sake of making our job easier. Nothing about this system was easy. I'm emotional about it and I need to get that off my chest. Absolutely nothing was simple about this system. I lost a lot of sleep. Okay? It's one thing when you do it personally. Like, I would get to it when I get to it personally, and I probably want to really get it built. But when it comes to being a professional and you got to get the job done, I lost a lot of sleep. It was 100% anxiety ridden, but I kind of feel like when you really care about the work that you do and you have a passion for it, like, that's a given. I'm sure a lot of you could probably relate that when you're putting a lot of time and effort about something you really love and it's just not going the way you want it to, it's anxiety inducing. But was it worth it? 100% it was worth it. Now that it's all done and it sits in front of you and you could see the fruits of my labor, of my peers' labor, and everybody who had anything to do with this, it was 100% worth it. Would I do it again? No. Because I want the next one to be Darth Vader themed. And it will be mine.
Let's go ahead and take a look at the process that it took for us to break this system down and exactly why we decided to rebuild it entirely. You know, I will hand it to them. They did have a pretty neat color theme going. It's very rare that you'd ever see somebody choose like a sky blue and a milky white coolant. I'm draining the first loop, which looks to be connected to the CPU. And we wanted to drain it to get a better assessment of exactly how this was built. It was a major pain in the ass. They did absolutely nothing to make sure that draining this loop was going to be simple. As you can see, I had to use the bottle that you typically premix coolant in to pour into the loop to use the suction function of that bottle to pull as much coolant out of the reservoirs as I could. Now, probably about the only convenient thing they did do is that when they built it and then they converted it to softline in the back panel of the system, they used quick disconnects. So that's why you can see as I was tipping the system, the soft tube that is blue with blue coolant, it's not leaking anymore because at the other end, you can see that quick disconnect. I'm about to pull that quick disconnect off and let it pour into the bucket like I just did. Just look at right there. Look at the difference in tubes. They're both softline tubes. They just use 2 different tube types. Why? I have no idea. It's kind of insane the way that they have the wire management, or better yet, lack thereof, on the back panel of this. There's cables mixed up with tubes. You honestly can't make heads or tails just from looking at it on the surface. They mounted the power supply in the middle because they had to, due to where they routed the tubes. I mean, holy hell, they had power cables hanging out of the bottom of the system. Like, there are visible power cables on the outside of this system. Nobody, and I mean nobody in their right mind that builds systems is going to be okay with having cables just on the outside of the system. There's so much that could go wrong with doing that. Oh, dear God. Those holes. So they drilled holes into the case to mount those radiators because they needed it to line up in a certain way. And they didn't even do a great job. You know, if you look even closer, they like punctured and cut 3 different areas and just left a wide gaping hole. Now you can see right here, Gerard is trying to take out that bottom radiator, which was only a 240 mil. And they originally fit 2 360s in a 240, which was excessive. The whole purpose of you isolating the CPU and the GPU on separate loops is so that one loop doesn't affect the other. So you don't need to compensate by adding more radiators like you would if everything was going to be a single loop. So as you can see here, Gerard's starting to pull more things out of the back panel. Loops are completely drained in. At the beginning of the time lapse, Gerard looks like a completely normal human being. And by the time his part's done, he's like sweating profusely. It was a lot of work. It was a significant amount of work just to break it down, to undo what had been done horribly. But ultimately, you know, this system deserved more. That's why we did what we did. That's why we put as much time into it as we absolutely could. It's just insane. Absolutely insane. They didn't even make sure that all of the fans match throughout the system. They used different fans, which for anybody that knows, you want to make sure all of the fans match so static pressure is the same regardless. I'm angry looking at it and revisiting this. I get really emotional about systems that are built like crap, if you can't tell. I guess that's when you've been doing this for so long, and when you've been doing it since you were a young kid. You know, it's just, you compare what you would do yourself to what you see other people do, and you no idea what crosses their mind. But, you know, it makes me really proud looking back at how terrible this system was originally built and what we ended up doing. It's kind of a mess all around, no pun intended. You can see that we're mopping things up, making sure that we try not to make as much of a mess as possible. It ended up really not mattering as far as keeping all of the coolant off of the parts, because a lot of the parts ended up changing. But I hope this is the last system we ever need to rebuild. But if it isn't, certainly we're going to make sure that it is better than the way that it was left with us. All right, Jim. Moment you've been waiting for. You ready?
Yes.
She's waiting. Let's do this. So, a little dark. We'll have you stand. We'll say right here. Okay, all right. We ready? 3, 2, 1.
Dude. That looks freaking sick.
Do you recognize anything special about it? Anything different? All right, now
Well,
you can definitely
the whole
do
thing looks different. Dude. That is freaking awesome, man.
Anything come to mind looking at it?
Boba Fett?
Yep.
That is beyond awesome.
That is Boba
Like,
Fett.
This is beyond anything I imagined. You guys did such a good job with it.
That's good. Then yeah, we did exactly what we set out to do.
And like, I love how it's just like, it's worn. You know, like
Yes.
Boba Fett's helmet.
This should not be 2 colors. It's just one reservoir. It shouldn't be 2 colors. But it is 2 colors.
How did you manage that?
I will show you. If you look at the back, you remember how bad the back was, right?
Oh yeah.
Come here and take a look at the back from over here.
The back was half the reason I brought it to you guys.
That was the whole reason. So I made sure we did hardline everywhere.
Oh, nice.
Second pump, that's running the red coolant through that distro panel back to the front.
and then the distribution panel and the block in that distribution panel, or the pump in that distribution panel, is what's pushing the gray coolant.
Oh, cool.
So that's something I've not seen anybody do. At least it's not something that's mainstream. I don't see anybody take a distribution panel and just be like, I'm going to run another pump through it. That was one of the things, like, very early on, like when we were coming up with ideas, we were like, well, if we're going to do a distribution panel, we have to have one pump and one res. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to do that because the system was a dual loop to begin with. I want to keep it a dual loop. So that was probably the biggest pain in the ass with this system, was figuring out how in the hell am I going to route in a second pump and a res without it looking stupid and without it, and like with it being tasteful. And that's when, like, Gerard and I put our heads together with like the coolant colors and the designs. So that's why we made sure the left side of the panel is red, which is what the GPU loop is, and then the whole center, which is the biggest part, is gray, because, you know, Boba Fett's armor, his Under Armour, he's got like the gray cloth tip, right? And there's not a whole lot of gray in the system, so that added the balance to it, and that's why Zach left the gray in the insides of the panel to kind of, anything he could do to kind of add to the design idea.
That's awesome.
That's what he did.
Yeah, next to the painting process, color balancing was probably the most complicated consideration we had to take.
We actually went to a shop out in Reminderville that all they do is car paint. And you walk in and they're just like, what do you want? And we gave them color codes, and they just slapped these two big-ass books in front of Gerard and I, and they were like, that's what those codes are from, now you got to pick the color. And we were just like, okay. So that's what we did. And at first, Zach was looking at the colors. He's like, I don't know about this, man. And then he threw it in his paint gun and his airbrush, and then he comes back, he's like, no, these are spot on, these are perfect. You know, we even had to repaint like the panel, this panel that we created right here. It's usually where you put fans, and we created that panel to do these pass-throughs. He had to paint that well after he already painted the case, because I originally had a piece of plexiglass in it, so I could mock it up, make sure all the runs lined up, and then I handed it over to Zach. I was like, all right, now you got to replicate this on metal. And even after painting that, like, months after we did everything else, it's spot on. Still matched.
Awesome.
So, now the greatest thing about this, I think, on top of the paint job, you had, when you brought this in, it had a 9900KS, right?
Yeah.
Had an RTX 2080 Ti. And you had a Gigabyte Z, I think it was like a
490.
490? Okay. Well, now you have an MSI Z690-A Wi-Fi. Your processor, thanks to Intel, is a 2900K. Hasn't even been out for a month yet. You have it. And your graphics card is an RTX 3080.
12900.
You're joking.
No. It's an RTX 3080.
That's freaking awesome.
Well, dude, I figured, like, for as long as we took getting this done for you, it's like every time went by, we're like, we have to keep upping the ante because we have to make it worth it. And this would have been ready 3 months ago. And it wasn't until Brooke in digital marketing was like, so I told Intel about what we're doing, and they want to send us a processor for it because they want to make a big deal about it. So this was done like well before, like, you know, companies like us were privileged to that stuff, right?
Right. Awesome.
The best part too is you don't have to baby it, because the more you weather the case, the better it's gonna look.
True. That's gonna be the kind of case I can build in for the next 15 years.
Dude, that's what we wanted to do. The temperatures in this fucking system, dude. I sent you the screenshot. Of
Yeah.
You're like, that's got to be like, that can't be right. Well, if you look, the left we're all at idle, the right we're all under max load. But yeah, this is the coldest running system I've ever built.
Yeah, that's what you were saying.
I can't even get my own systems to run that cold at all. So.
That's freaking awesome, man.
Yeah.
That is so awesome.
All of the fans are connected to the DRGB header on the board through the MSI software. I kept your OS intact, thanks to Craig actually holding the camera. These new boards don't like when you boot off Legacy, and every time I tried to boot off Legacy with CSM enabled, it would just take a dump. So Craig popped your SSD into his laptop and converted it from Legacy to UEFI, so now it just boots right up.
Okay.
So no problems there. That's really the only change.
Nice.
That's about it.
That's awesome.
So
really the only change, not the processor, not the color, none of that.
No,
you know, it's just SSD. That's the real change.
None whatsoever. So we work with a company called Mainframe Customs. There's a button. Oh, and then it'll fill out. we worked with a company that does our sleeve cables called Mainframe Customs, and all I did was show him a picture of your system painted, and he's like, I got your cables. I'll make them.
That's awesome.
So it was the cables he made. Yeah. Dude, it was perfect. I had like the perfect amount of cables and length to do everything. Super clean back here if you ever need to do anything other than the crazy zip tie magic I did on some of the smaller motherboard cables, but it worked out really well because this board had all of the mid-board USB ports to make all of your USB ports live on the front.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So,
That's freaking awesome, man.
it was, I just got done telling Intel too because I had a meeting with them today. And they're like, yeah, well, you know, we'll share all this on social media channels. And they're like, you guys did a really great job. I was like, thanks. I'll never build another one of these again. I'll never fucking do it again. This is the hardest system I ever worked on. It took so much time and effort, you know.
Well, I appreciate it, man.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's one of those things where, honestly, like, oh, we're going to do all this. And then the moment I started doing it and everybody else started doing it, it was like, this is a fuck ton of work.
Yeah, it looks real clean.
Yeah, I just wanted to apologize for how friggin' heavy it is.
I think I'll survive.
Cool, man.
I think I can make that work.
Well, let's go ahead and let's shut her off so you can take her home.
All right.
Get you underway. Thanks for stopping by, man, and letting us do a reveal video.
Well,
you know.
thanks for everything you guys have done for me.
Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. It means a lot to me, especially, and to all of us at AVA Direct that you took the time to watch it because this system was a pretty big deal for us. We will have a landing page up to kind of get a little more in depth into the things that we did. More importantly, more than anything, we like to do these kinds of systems because we like to show and demonstrate our capability. We put our money where our mouths are, and we put our skill set where our money is. And this is what you see, all right? If you guys want a system like this, we can build it for you. For some semi-obvious reasons, we can't list it on our site because we did not do this to make money. We did this to show what we're made of. And I really hope we were successful in doing that. I mean that. More than any of the other videos I've done, I really hope this shows all of you what we're capable of and what we can do when we put our heart into it, which is every day, honestly. Every day. If you want a system like this, if you want a themed build, if you just want a system that's specific to you, that has every amount of consideration into it, give us a call, shoot us an email, send us a text. However you need to get in touch with us, we're here to make it happen, if that's what you want. Stay tuned for more. Subscribe, like, if you want, or just watch our videos. If you get enjoyment out of it, cool. That's why we do these things. Thanks, guys. Take care.